Okay, a day later than planned, but the history video on the London Broncos is here, and there's a lot of writing on the board. Now, the club was actually originally founded in 1980, and they weren't called the London Broncos. No, they were Fulham Rugby League Football Club, and they played at Craven Cottage. Now, they were called Fulham Rugby League Football Club between 1980 and 1991, so this is pre-Super League era. And they played at Craven Cottage for the most part, although there were issues with the pitch and the drainage, especially the underground sewer into the Thames. There was a lot of issues, so they didn't play every home game at Craven Cottage because at periods the pitch was unplayable due to drainage issues. But their home ground was Craven Cottage at the time. Now, they've also been called the London Crusaders for a couple of seasons between 91 and 94. Then they were called the London Broncos in 94 till 2005, and obviously 2011 till present. There was a brief spell where they were called Harlequins because they had an agreement with Harlequins Rugby Union side and played at the Stoop for a few years between 2005 and 2011. Their most successful period was in the mid-90s to early 2000s. That's when the London Broncos were one of the best clubs in the country. They never actually won any silverware, but they got to a Challenge Cup final and finished second in the Super League in the late 90s, and they were the heady days of the London Broncos. They've declined since then and started to bounce back up. Now, we're not going to go through the promotions and relegations because I did not have space on the board. But in their entire tenure, going from Fulham Rugby League Football Club to the London Broncos to the present day, these are some of their home grounds. I couldn't get all the home grounds on the board, but these are some of their permanent homes when they've been called various things. So they started out at Craven Cottage, which is also the home of Fulham Football Club. They also played at Crystal Palace National Sports Centre. Well, that's an arena, isn't it? They've also played at Chiswick Polytechnic Sports Ground. I'm not even sure if that still exists. They played at Barnet Copthall. That's, I believe, now been flattened. They played at the Valley, which is the home of Charlton Athletic when they first joined the Super League, when they helped found the Super League in the mid-90s. They also have played at the Stoop when they were called Harlequins. So for the years they were called Harlequins, they played at the Stoop. They played at Griffin Park, which is the old home, soon-to-be old home of Brentford Football Club, and they've also played at the Hive Stadium, which is the old home of Barnet Football Club. So they've migrated around London before they actually ended up at the Trailfinders in Ealing, which is, I think, the smallest ground on the list. They've had some reasonable sized attendances. The Trailfinders only seats around 2,500, and there's 4,000 in total capacity. So it's not the biggest ground, but it's quite easily to get to. You can get there by train, by the A4. It's in a pretty good spot in Ealing. It's just a very small ground. It's one of the smallest grounds, I think, on the list. They've moved around a lot, and that's part of the problem with the London Broncos, building stability and trying to grow a fan base in London. The biggest stadium they played at, I believe, is the Valley, although their record attendance took place at Craven Cottage, and we'll get to that. But the issue with the Broncos is they've moved around. They are literally exiles in their own city, which is a massive problem. They've never had one permanent home from foundation to present day. They have moved a lot. And this is why other clubs are more successful, is they've got that permanent home base and they can build a fan base around the stadium that they have. The Broncos, depends on who's in charge and who owns the club. They've moved from place to place. Now, their agreement with Trailfinders was initially a 3-year deal. If they stay in the Super League and make success out of it, I think that will become a more permanent home, because obviously Ealing Trailfinders Rugby Union Club play there. So they've shared a rugby union ground with Harlequins. That obviously didn't work out in the end because they're no longer called Harlequins, and they've moved a few times since then. Hopefully Trailfinders becomes their permanent home forevermore, and the Broncos can find success in Ealing in West London. But there's a lot of movement there for various reasons. Now, they obviously came close to winning the Challenge Cup and came close to actually being regular season Super League winners in the late 90s. Since then, it has tailed off. They dropped down to the Championship for a few seasons. They won promotion in the £1 million game against the Toronto Wolfpack at the end of last season in a very low scoring playoff final, 4-2. That is one of the lowest scoring rugby league games I think I've ever seen. And they've obviously back in the Super League. They've obviously had that big win last weekend against St Helens with Golden Point, their first ever Golden Point game as the London Broncos. Yeah, they've never had a Golden Point game before until last weekend, which they won 23 points to 22 at Trailfinders. So that could be the boost that their season needs for survival, because it would be a travesty if they were to drop out of the Super League. London does need a team to grow the game in the south of England. It really does. Now we're going to get on to the record holders. And this list isn't the longest. I didn't want to go into most tries in a game. I would have run out of space on the board. But I've gone with the most tries, most points, most appearances, biggest win, biggest loss, and highest home attendance. There's so much stuff I could have put on the board with various owners, league position. I would have run out of room. And we can do more detailed, biggest losses in Super League era, biggest wins in the Super League era for each club and do a whole separate video on that. And the same with the NRL. But let's have a look at their top try scorer. Their top try scorer in the Super League era is Dennis Moran. He had 74 tries. He's still the club's record try scorer, I actually believe, all time as well. He got those tries between 2001 and 2004. So 74 tries in 3 years. That's pretty solid going. This is when the Super League was, I believe, better than the NRL. It was a superior league to the NRL. This is my personal view. This is when Super League was the top rugby league competition in the world, in my view. The most points is by Paul Sykes. He has 772, and that was also in the same period of time, 2001 to 2007. So this is before they get relegated out the Super League. They had some pretty decent players. Paul Sykes, one of, I think, Super League's forgotten heroes, I think. The most appearances, now this is a name for sport. Steel Retchless. I'm sorry, I'm not making up. That is a real name. Steel Retchless. He has 202 appearances between 1998 and 2004. He is a club legend. He also has the most tackles in a game as well, and I could have put that on the board, and I could have done a complete and utter bio of his career if I really wanted to. He holds some club records. Most tackles in a game, most appearances for the club. Steel Retchless. That is a name. And he's a club legend. Their biggest win came back in 1998 in the Challenge Cup, 82-0 versus Highfield. And that was on the 12th of November 98. Their biggest loss, I also believe, came in the Challenge Cup against Wakefield. They lost 66 points to 10. That was on the 15th of February 1981, which coincides with their biggest ever home attendance of 15,013 people inside the great and old pre-rebuilt Craven Cottage. They have, and that's the official home ground attendance, because they have played some games on the road where they've got some big numbers. But that's their official home attendance all time in a regular competition match, 15,013. There have been reports that their first ever game at Craven Cottage got over 100,000, or a game got 100,000 at Craven Cottage, but for an official Challenge Cup game, they got just over 15,000. That's not bad going, considering that rugby league is considered in this country a preserve of the north of England. And when everyone says they shouldn't be here, they're going to get relegated, South won't support rugby league, the numbers suggest otherwise. That is actually higher than your average Super League attendance, is what they got against Wakefield. Now, the fact that the Trailfinders is a smaller stadium is a hindrance, but there are rugby league fans in the south. I am one of them, and I can quite easily get to Ealing from where I live. I might have to go see a couple of games, actually. I might have to catch a few games when I can get some time off work, because obviously some games take place in the middle of the week, and of course that's a bit difficult for me. But the issue with London Broncos is not that they haven't had good sides and good players. It's the moving around and the constant change of ownership and the constant uncertain future about where their next home ground is going to be. They have moved a lot. And a lot of their stadiums aren't really rugby stadiums. They're football stadiums. They've only really played at one rugby stadium, and that is the Stoop, and that's a Union stadium. And they've moved a lot. And that's the struggle they find, is finding that permanent home to build a fan base, build a community, and stick there. Their longest spell at a home stadium, I actually believe, was Craven Cottage. 11 years. They have moved around a lot, and that's a problem. Whether they could fill Craven Cottage now with the fan base they have, we shall see. It'll be interesting to see if they could fill a stadium like Craven Cottage and pack it out, because Craven Cottage has been completely rebuilt since they played there. There's one of the biggest, single tier stands in the country, much bigger stadium, much bigger capacity. Could they fill out Craven Cottage? That would be interesting if they were still there. Could they fill out Craven Cottage? That's a real interesting fact. But it would be, Trailfinders is their home for now. Hopefully it becomes their permanent home and some money gets invested in Trailfinders, because they had a sellout against St Helens at the weekend. They sold that stadium out to capacity, which says to me there is a market for rugby league in the south of England. Fans are willing to show up week in and week out, and they've had some great players. And Steele Retchless, that is a name that I have to cover his career now because he's got such a unique name. Steele as a first name as a rugby league player who's a forward who makes 30, 40 tackles a game. Yeah, I'm doing a video on him. But there we go. That's a brief history of the London Broncos. I could look at some of like, I could have put most tries in a game, most points in a game, most field goals in a game. There's a lot of records I couldn't get on the board, but I think I've done them justice with this little video. If I've missed anything out, or I could have had some more facts thrown at me, place them in the comment section below. If you are a London Broncos fan, I would love to hear from you. Please, again, feel free to drop a comment below, drop a like, drop a subscribe, and of course there'll be some more history videos of NRL clubs, which I've allowed to lapse, which is my fault, and there'll be some more Super League clubs as well. And we might even get onto clubs like Featherstone, Halifax, and some clubs down in the Championship, because there's some really interesting clubs in the Championship as well who've got really rich histories, who won a lot of trophies in their day, and I'll have to do some videos on them. But anyway, for now, thank you very much for watching. Please like and subscribe, place those comments below, and I'll have some more videos for you very, very soon.